In this video, I'm going to show you how to knit a top-down garter stitch shawl. I will be knitting the two little shawls that you see here. The first one uses the yarn over increase, so you get this lacy spine down the center of the shawl. A lot of people don't like how that looks, so I'll also show you how to do it using the knit front and back increase so that your shawl looks like this instead. The yarn that I will be using for this video is from Premier. It's the Hipster Cotton. I'm not sure if they still make this. I just found this in my local dollar store a while back. This is a light number 3 yarn, and the recommended needle size is US size 6. You're also going to want to have a stitch marker on hand. This will help you remember where your center stitch is and where to place your increases. Now the needles that I'm going to be using in this video are double pointed needles. You're not going to use double pointed needles for a regular sized shawl. I'm only using these because ours are so small. I would recommend at least a 32-inch circular needle when you are knitting shawls. You can get circulars up to, I believe it's 60 inches long. And my personal preference for circular needles with shawls is longer the better, just because I don't like to have my stitches all bunched up. You can get written instructions for these two little shawls at the link in the video description, so if you want to check that out, and you can follow along with any yarn and needles that you have on hand. The first shawl that we're going to knit is the one with the yarn over increases down the center. So I have my yarn and my needles, and I'm just going to cast on 3 stitches. And then I'm going to begin knitting. So for row 1, I'm going to knit the first stitch. Then I'm going to make a yarn over. And then I'm going to place my stitch marker onto my needle. Then I'm going to knit the next stitch, yarn over, and knit the last stitch. So you should now have 5 stitches on your needle. For row 2, just going to knit all stitches. When you get to your stitch marker, you just slip it to the right needle and continue knitting. For row 3, this is the increase row. So you're just going to knit the first stitch, make a yarn over, and then knit until you get to the stitch marker. So at this point it's only 1 stitch that we're going to knit. So here's our stitch marker, and before we slip that over to the right needle, we're going to make a yarn over. Now slip your marker. Now we're going to knit the next stitch. This is our center stitch, and this is always going to be knit. And then yarn over. And now we're going to knit until we have 1 stitch on the left needle. In this case, we're only going to be knitting 1. Okay, and then yarn over. Knit the last stitch. So we're always going to have a yarn over after our first stitch, a yarn over before our stitch marker, knit the stitch right after the marker, and then make a yarn over, and then you'll always have a yarn over before your last stitch. And really that's all it is for the shawl. You're going to be repeating rows 2 and 3. So that was an increase row. Now we're just going to knit all stitches. When you get to your stitch marker, You just slip it over to the right needle and continue knitting. Now another increase row. So you knit the first stitch, make a yarn over, knit to the marker, and when you get to your marker, make a yarn over, slip the marker, knit one stitch, that's your center stitch, yarn over, knit until you have one stitch left, yarn over, and knit the last stitch. So it looks a little funny at this point. It's supposed to look a little funny. Just keep going and this will turn into a nice little triangle shawl. Okay, so again we're going to repeat a plain knit row. Just knit all stitches. And again, when you get to your marker, you just slip it over to the right needle and continue knitting. Okay, another increase row. You knit the first stitch, yarn over, knit until you reach the stitch marker, when you get to your stitch marker, make a yarn over, slip the marker, knit one, yarn over, knit until you have one stitch left, yarn over, and knit the last stitch. Okay, knit a plain row, I'm going to show you how to do the increase row one more time, and then I'm going to do a few more rows and then show you the bind off. So again, for the increase row, you knit the first stitch, make a yarn over, knit until you reach your stitch marker, make a yarn over, slip your stitch marker, knit one, yarn over, knit until there's one stitch left, yarn over, and knit the last stitch. So I just wanted to share a little tip with you about remembering whether or not you're on an increase row or a plain knit row. So when you're on a plain knit row, you're going to come across stitches that look like this, and that is your yarn over stitch from the previous row, meaning that the previous row was an increase row. So I know that I'm going to be knitting all stitches on this row. However, sometimes we can get distracted, or maybe we just get so into our knitting that we're not really paying attention. You can clip a stitch marker to one of the sides of your shawl like I've done here. So when I see this green stitch marker, I know that this row I'm just going to be knitting all of my stitches. You can clip it to the other side to remind you that those rows are increase rows. Okay, so I've knit about 10 rows, and now I am ready to bind off my mini shawl. For binding off, you want to make sure that your bind off edge is not too firm because you want it to stretch when you block it. So all I'm going to do is knit 2 stitches together through the back loop, slip that stitch back to my left needle, and repeat. Knit 2 together through the back loop, put the stitch back on your left needle, I'm just going to continue doing that until I have all of my stitches bound off. When you get to your stitch marker, you can just take that off and continue binding off. Just cut my tail, leave enough to weave in, pull that through, get rid of this extra marker. So here's our little shawl. Of course you would want to weave in your ends and block this. But that is how to do a top-down shawl with yarn over increases. And next, we are going to do the one with the knit front and back increases. For the second shawl, we're going to start just like we did for the first one. Cast on 3 stitches. And then for row 1, we're going to knit the first stitch, make a yarn over, and then place a stitch marker onto your needle. Knit the next stitch, yarn over, and knit the last stitch. For row 2, just going to knit all stitches, slip the marker, and continue knitting. For row 3, going to knit the first stitch, yarn over, knit to the marker, yarn over, slip the marker, knit 1, yarn over, knit to the last stitch, yarn over, and then knit your last stitch. Row 4, knit all stitches, okay, now for row 5, you knit the first stitch, yarn over, and now you're going to knit until there's 1 stitch before the marker. Okay, so here's our marker, and we have 1 stitch before. Now we're going to knit into the front and back of this stitch. That's knit into the front, and now to knit into the back. Slip the marker, knit the next stitch, and then knit into the front and knit into the back of the next stitch. And now you're going to knit to the last stitch, yarn over, and then knit the last stitch. Row 6, knit all stitches, slip your marker and continue knitting. So from here on out, you're just going to be repeating rows 5 and 6. So we're back to an increased row. So you're going to knit the first stitch, yarn over, knit to 1 stitch before the marker, and then into the stitch before the marker you're going to knit into the front and knit into the back, slip the marker. Now this is our center stitch. We're always going to knit this stitch, and then the next stitch knit into the front and knit into the back, knit until there's 1 stitch left on your needle, yarn over, and knit the last stitch. Next row, knit all stitches, the next row is an increase row. So you knit the first stitch, yarn over, knit to one stitch before the marker, knit into the front and back of the stitch before your marker, slip the marker, knit one, and then in the next stitch, knit into the front and knit into the back, knit until there's one stitch left, yarn over, and knit the last stitch. Knit all stitches, okay, so just continue repeating those 2 rows. I'm going to work a few more repeats and then we'll come back and bind off. Okay, I've worked a few repeats and now I'm ready to bind off. I'm going to do the same bind off that I did before. I'm going to knit 2 together through the back loop, and then place that stitch back onto my left needle, knit 2 together through the back loop, place that stitch back on the left needle. I'm just going to repeat knit 2 together through the back loop, placing the stitch back onto my left needle until I have bound off all of my stitches. Cut the tail, leave yourself about 1 inch or so you can weave that in. I'm not going to weave mine in because I'm not going to be wearing this, so I don't have any worries that it's going to come apart. I'm going to snip this as well. Okay, so then of course you will want to block this into shape. that is how to knit top down garter stitch shawls.